When you think of world-changing technology, the tractor probably isn't the first thing that pops into your head, but it absolutely should be. We're about to dive into the incredible story of how this humble farm machine went from simple brute force to having a brilliant digital brain.
So, here is how we're going to break it all down. First up, we'll start at the very beginning with replacing the horse. Then we'll see how it became the people's tractor. After that, it's all about the wild race for power. And finally, we'll get to today and the smart machine. But before we get to all the giant machines and high-tech gadgets, we have to ask a really basic question. What problem was the tractor actually built to solve? I mean, it wasn't about going fast or being comfortable. Not at first, anyway. Nope, it was about tackling a problem as old as farming itself.
And Henry Ford just hit the nail on the head with this. His ambition was to lift farm drudgery off flesh and blood and lay it on steel and motors. Think about that. This wasn't just some engineering project. It was a mission to end centuries of backbreaking, soul-crushing labor. It was about fundamentally changing millions of lives.
And let's be clear, the challenge here was, well, it was immense. The entire agricultural system for all of human history ran on animal muscle. We're talking about over 26 million horses and mules in the U.S. alone. And the goal? To replace all of that with a single, reliable machine. That is a massive mountain to climb.
What's really wild is just how fast this all happened. I mean, look at this. You go from one guy, John Froelich, tinkering in a workshop in 1892, to a full-on global showcase in England by 1920. That's less than 30 years. That event in Lincoln wasn't just some contest. It was the world declaring, okay, the mechanical horse is for real. It is here to stay.
And right from the start, there were two totally different ideas about what a tractor should be. Over in North America, with those huge, wide-open plains, they built these absolute monsters, these Prairie Heavyweights. They were meant to replace the giant steam engines. But in Europe, where farms were smaller, the idea was different. They created these lighter, more nimble agrimotors, designed specifically to be a direct one-for-one replacement for a horse.
4,000. That number might not seem huge, but it's everything when you hear the story behind it. This is how many tractors Britain desperately imported during World War I. German U-boats were sinking food shipments, and the country was literally on the brink of starvation. All of a sudden, the tractor wasn't just a nifty farm tool. It was a weapon, a critical tool for national survival.
Okay, so the war proved the tractor was essential. No doubt about it. But it was still super expensive, a luxury most farmers could only dream of. The next big step, the next chapter in our story, was all about changing that. It was time to put that power into everyone's hands. Welcome to the era of the people's tractor.
So how'd they do it? Well, the genius of the Fordson Model F was something called unit construction. See, before this, tractors were built on a big, heavy frame, kind of like a truck. Ford's big idea was, what if we just get rid of the frame? He used the engine and the gearbox as the backbone of the whole thing. This was a total game changer. It made the tractor lighter, stronger, and way, way cheaper to build.
And this just kicked off a huge revolution in what a tractor could do. First, the Fordson made it affordable. Great. But then you get the Farmall, with its brilliant design that let it drive over rows of plants without crushing them. Now you can cultivate. And then, bam! Alice Chalmers puts rubber tires on them. Suddenly they're faster, more efficient. The tractor was no longer just a plow. It was becoming the farmer's Swiss Army knife.
Now this next bit is pure genius. Harry Ferguson's system completely changed how tractors work. Before, a tractor just dragged an implement behind it, like dead weight. Ferguson figured out how to make the tractor and the plow work together as one unit. Using hydraulics, it actually used the weight and force of the plow to push down on the tractor's back wheels. More weight means more grip, so you could have a much lighter, safer, and more efficient tractor that pulled like a much heavier one. It was absolutely brilliant. All right, so by now the tractor is affordable, it's efficient, it's versatile, it's on pretty much every farm. So where do you go from there? Well, in the booming post-war era, the answer was simple: more power. And this set off an absolute arms race for bigger, stronger, more capable machines.
And what was fueling this whole race for power? One word: diesel. Yeah, early tractors ran on gas or paraffin, but if you want serious stump-pulling torque, you need a diesel engine. They're just more powerful and more efficient. The switch to diesel wasn't a small change. It's what made the entire horsepower explosion possible.
But here's the thing.
As these machines got bigger and more powerful, they also got a lot more dangerous. And frankly, they were miserable to operate for 12 hours a day. So for the first time, manufacturers started thinking seriously about the person in the seat. We start seeing rollover protection, quiet cabs, power steering, and even air conditioning. The driver's seat went from being just an iron perch out in the open to a modern, safe, and comfortable workspace.
Remember those old Prairie Heavyweights? Well, they came back. But this time they were different. They were these incredible bend-in-the-middle articulated giants. Instead of turning the front wheels, the whole tractor would pivot in the center. This design was genius because it meant you could have 4 huge, identical tires all pulling with maximum power. These were the new kings of the biggest farms on Earth.
Which brings us to this number, 900. 900 horsepower. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a truly staggering amount of power for a farm machine. It's almost absurd. So you have to wonder, what on earth does a 900 horsepower tractor even look like?
Well, this is it. Meet the king, the Big Bud 16V747. This machine is the absolute peak of the horsepower race, a complete legend. It wasn't something you could just buy off the lot. It was a one-of-a-kind, custom-built monster designed to prove a point. Weighing over 40 tons, it was the tractor equivalent of climbing Mount Everest, just to show that you could.
Okay, so we've pretty much hit the limit of raw power. You can't just keep making tractors bigger and bigger forever. The next great leap forward wasn't going to come from more muscle. It had to come from more brain. It was time to pair all that brute force with some serious digital intelligence.
One of the first big steps in this smarter direction was rethinking how tractors even touch the ground. For years, you had a choice, wheels for speed or steel tracks for grip. But steel tracks were slow and they destroyed roads. Then, in 1987, Caterpillar introduced the Challenger, the first tractor with tough rubber tracks. Suddenly, you got the best of both worlds, all the grip of a crawler, but with the speed of a wheeled machine.
But the real brain came from the sky. This is where we get into precision farming. Using GPS signals from satellites, tractors could now know their exact position on the field, down to the centimeter. This meant they could steer themselves perfectly, putting every single seed, every drop of fertilizer in the exact right spot. No waste. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a complete reinvention of efficiency.
And you can actually pinpoint the moment the computer really arrived in the cab. It was 1986 with Massey Ferguson's Tronics systems. For the first time, a computer was making decisions about things like gear changes and hydraulics. These were the baby steps, sure, but they were the crucial first steps. This was the beginning of the end for tractors that were just nuts, bolts, and levers.
And this table right here, it just sums up the entire journey, doesn't it? I mean, look at this. You go from 14 horsepower to over 200, from one gear forward and one back to a transmission that's infinitely variable. And the controls, they go from simple levers to a touchscreen command center that steers itself with satellites. It's not just an upgrade, it's like comparing a horse and buggy to a spaceship. The leap is just astonishing.
Which brings us to today, and a really fascinating final question. Remember Henry Ford's goal? To lift the work off of flesh and blood and put it onto steel and motors? Well, mission accomplished. But now, we're lifting the thinking off of flesh and blood and putting it onto silicon and satellites. So as these machines become fully autonomous, self-driving robots, you really have to wonder, does the tractor of the future need a person in the picture at all? What's the next chapter in this incredible story?